Welcome to the Developing Life podcast. Creativity bridges the gaps between people, transforming personal expression into community engagement. How does this creative fusion encourage stronger connections and a sense of belonging? Today, we are joined by Stefan Bucher, an accomplished designer, author, and innovator known for his dynamic approach to visual and interactive arts and storytelling. Stefan's eclectic career has seen collaborations with leading tech firms, cultural icons like Sting and Whitney Houston, and NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, as well as creating immersive visual experiences for films and television. His Daily Monster project stands out as a prime example of how art can create interactive communities and inspire shared experiences across the globe. With our host, Heather Crank, we'll dive into Stefan's design approach that not only beautifies, but binds, emphasizing the significance of storytelling and how creativity serves as a powerful conduit for connection, inspiration, and building something greater than oneself.
Thank you, True. Welcome, Stefan. It's so nice to have you here. So just to dig right into it, I first learned about you on Twitter Spaces when that was a thing when they were competing with Clubhouse, and you were speaking with Chris Do. So I'm curious, how did you two meet?
Chris and I went to college together. I don't think we really knew each other back then. But over the years, sort of through shared friends, we got to know each other a little bit. And Chris was nice enough to invite me to a few things. And, he's been such a powerhouse and continues to be such a powerhouse of education and of connecting people. And so it was just a pleasure to get to play with him in his space.
So at Art Center, what did you study?
I was an advertising major.
Wow.
And Chris, I think, was a graphic design major, which is also why we never met, because it was very, very siloed. Or we had very few points of intersection. But yeah, I was an advertising major based on the idea that I would be able to do illustration and graphic design and writing and music and film and everything, and kind of mash it all together, which was true in school. And then as soon as I went out and worked for an ad agency, that little dream of mine got crushed mercilessly and quickly. And they were basically like, sit here, we're going to slide some headlines under your door, make it look good type monkey. And and so I lasted not very long at that.
So is this where your love of letter forms began? Was it with the advertising focus?
I think my love of letter forms began as a child. I mean, this was growing up in Germany, not, sort of ludicrous to say like, oh, well, like Germany where we have letters. There's letters everywhere. But I mean, I grew up in a town that's at this point is like 800 years old. It's a Renaissance town. And so there's, first of all, just a lot of buildings where there's gilded letters, roughly hewn out of the wood on the side of the building or carved into the stone. And so you're just surrounded by really exquisite letter forms all day long.
Wow.
My parents were big book nerds. And so that was always around. My dad in particular was very into old books as well. So he would go to the swap meets and just find all these old books. So there was always Futur and all this old calligraphy around. And I also, on the other side of it, I was introduced to comics fairly early. And so there's that kind of chunky, blobby letter form that really draws your attention to this is something to absorb aesthetically and not just to decode the words.
So you were interested in letter forms and you had this sort of upbringing with books. How did you jump from that into design?
I always say that the German national anthem should be actually the way I got into design was me seeing things that bothered me and trying to fix them.
Mm.
And so I would see cartoon characters that I thought weren't drawn the way I thought they should be drawn, seeing ads and books and titles that weren't designed the way I thought they should be designed.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was an obnoxious child, I would just go up to people and say, I don't like the way you did that. Can I please do it better?
Wow.
And how it happened sort of concretely was that I was part of a particular fandom and they had a fanzine and they invited me. They said, oh, you showed us this drawing. Can we print it in the magazine? And I was like, and I was 12 at that point, and
wow.
I was just absolutely hooked by seeing something of mine in print.
Yeah.
And so then I got very, very involved in the magazine and started doing titles for that, which is where the lettering first came in.
Mm.
And then I started doing covers and layouts and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then around 15, I had a falling out with them because I was 15. And they were being mean to me. And so I was like, I'm gone. I'm out of here. And I thought, okay, well, how do I still get my stuff printed? Because I needed my fix. And so I decided to just pick the worst ads in my local newspaper, redraw them to the same specs, and then just go to those stores and go, listen, I don't like the way your ad looks. Here's a better version of it. If you give me, 50 Deutschmarks cash, I'll cycle down to the newspaper and make them swap it out.
Wow.
And that's exactly how my advertising career started. And that's how the idea of going to advertising school originated. I was like, well, I'm already doing advertising. Let me just learn how to do it proper.
So what was their response to you when you walked in and said, I don't like how you laid out your ad? Like, how did they respond to your feedback?
It helped that I was 15. I mean, I was pretty much the same height I am now, but I think there was a slight protective force field of, oh, look, it's a spunky kid. I think if I did it, if I could do it now again, because I'm now aging into cranky senior, but there was like a 30-year period where it would have just been like, who is this asshole? Right? So I think it worked at 15 in a way that that would never work now. I'm very dark. Have clouds? There are clouds outside. How very un-California.
Yes. 'Tis the season.
Yeah.
Speaking of the season, so we are very close to Halloween, as we were mentioning and talking about earlier before you hopped on. And you are the author of The Daily Monster. I'm curious how this got started and what led you to keep going and keep doing it for as long as you did. It's quite an amazing project. And then at the end of this, I'd like to talk about your Kickstarter.
Oh, yeah. So the first monster came out of sort of a sequence of events. This was around, we're coming on 20 years with it. So around 2005, I'd done a lot of proper graphic design. I started out as a kind of comic book guy, as I mentioned, with the fanzine and everything had that kind of handmade aesthetic. And then I learned how to do proper design and do the sort of Swiss modern thing and everything, which I really took to, and it became very sort of flush left, ragged right. Everything must be just so in the point. Oh, grids are a very good way of presenting information. Love. And at some point, I was like, oh my God, like I'm actually, the stick up my ass is getting bigger and stronger, and I don't like it. And so I was taking my inspiration from music. I was like, how can I loosen up? How can I just be more relaxed and have something that's more spontaneous and that isn't just so spiritually constipated? And so I started experimenting with blown ink and with throwing ink and everything. And I made a post. And what came out of it is that I had just all this blown ink. And I was like, well, maybe I'll make it into stocks for flowers, because that's what it looked like to me at the time. And I made a big poster called 344 Flowers. And then it sort of just sat there for a year. And then I was in a fairly miserable romantic relationship. And that somehow congealed into like monsters were appearing in my head.
Ooh.
And it was kind of a friendly monster of support that
Mhm.
appeared to me on a drive on the freeway, and it just appeared on my arm, the first one. And I'm not a vision prone person, and so I paid attention to that. Went home, drew it, turned out nothing like the character that I saw in my head, but I enjoyed the process very much. And I thought, I'll turn this into a book. And we spoke earlier before we hopped on about my kind of noise sensitivities. And so I thought, what is the narrative framework for this? And so I called it the upstairs neighbors,
Mm.
because I was like, oh, these are the creatures that are making all the noises that are driving me to distraction.
Mhm.
Made a whole beautiful dummy of it and got the book bound and everything, and tried to shop it around to publishers. And it was taking a long time. And so I thought, how do I keep people interested? And so I was like, well, maybe I'll do like drawings on camera.
Mhm.
YouTube at the time was a year old, and I was like, well, I've pretty much missed YouTube as a trend.
Mhm.
But maybe I'll hop on at the very end of YouTube. And so I was like, do I do the Daily Doodle or something? And I was like, oh, the Daily Monster. Like, I'll draw these characters, and that'll be great to show publishers also that that's happening.
Mhm.
And I was really surprised that within the first few days I got like 200 people watching, which for me at the time was like, oh my God, 200 people are seeing this. This is amazing.
Mhm.
And then some people that I was friends with who had very big online presence at the time, like Zay Frank and the Under Consideration crew, and a site at the time called Unbeige, all mentioned it. And all of a sudden I saw this jump where all of a sudden thousands of people were showing up every day.
Wow.
And within about 10 days, people started writing stories about the monsters. And that came out of, somebody asked me, like, oh, what's the name of this monster? And I would like to present it as a flash of inspiration and creative genius, but in a revelation of true laziness. I said, I draw them, you name them.
Mm. Mhm.
My job is to create the character. You tell me what they're about. Like, what do you think their name is? And so then people started naming the characters. And then I was like, oh, they're responding to that. So I'm like, well, tell me, do you think they have a story? And then people started writing these really elaborate stories every day,
Wow.
often within like a half an hour of the monster appearing.
Wow.
And that became this real sort of storytelling scene, like a little sort of online salon.
Mhm.
And that was just magnificent to be at the heart of. And that's why I kept going. I mean, otherwise I would have done probably a few dozen or maybe 100. But I'm like, all right, well, that was a really fun aesthetic exercise. But the fact that it became the seed crystal for other people's creativity really kept me going.
Wow. Wow. It's amazing how you brought people together through that one moment of turning your suffering into something beautiful and visual. I mean, it's incredible.
Amazed the hell out of me because I'm not a naturally collaborative person.
Mhm.
I like to sort of take my little assignment, come here, take care of it, and then, there's a little bit of collaboration. But the idea of we're all just jamming together at the time wasn't natural to me.
Mhm.
And so it taught me that. And it taught me how much joy there is in giving somebody a starting point instead of giving somebody an entire meal.
Mm. Yeah, it's similar to a conversation where you engage them and then they engage back. It's really beautiful.
Versus my usual, Bond villain monologuing. So, yeah.
Oh, God. Okay, so, you took these amazing monsters and then you have kind of reincarnated them again, and you put up a Kickstarter, and it was funded very quickly. Can you talk about that process?
Yeah, I've been hoarding these drawings for 20 years because
Mhm.
they're very dear to me and they're fun to hold as original objects. And there's also sort of the imposter part of me that likes having the proof that I've done something and that there are things that I did nicely.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've gotten older and as the circumstances of my life have changed, I kind of got the sad thought of like, well, you know, the world is full of open manhole covers and city buses. There's going to be a day where I will depart the earthly plane, and these will all just kind of end up in the trash, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I think it was maybe a mistake to hold on to them so tightly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to find a way of dispersing the monsters into people's homes.
Mm-hmm.
The original artwork. And I thought, well, maybe creating a book around them and making it a Kickstarter
Mm-hmm.
lets me do two things. It lets me put out the original artwork in a way where people will treasure it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it gives me a chance to create a collection of the ones that I think are the best drawings. Because some of them got really popular because of where they appeared, or at what moment they appeared, or what story they suggested.
Mm-hmm.
But they weren't necessarily the best drawings as illustrations. And so I wanted to, just out of my own personal vanity or need to make an editorial statement, say, these are the 250 that I think are the best artwork.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And being the prepared person I am, I'll go over and reach for it. Somebody contacted me about printing, and there was a whole sort of sideline of, oh, here's an interesting material that didn't come together.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to my friends that I always print with at Typecraft, and I'm like, can you just make me a dummy what it would look like with 512 pages of regular paper?
Mm-hmm.
And so they sent me this thing.
Oh.
And I like an object.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the final piece of the puzzle that I needed to say, okay, well, let me make this book. Because if at the end of it, it's not a satisfying object where I myself go, oh yeah, like this makes me happy to hold, right?
Okay.
Then why bother?
Right.
And the thing that I got before, I've had this weird obsession that I wanted to print something on Bible paper for 30 years.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, that's going to be super, super cool. And 512 pages on Bible paper is like this thick.
Yeah.
And so it's like it looked messier than I thought, but then also looked too nice. And I was like, this isn't what I have in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And then but then I was like, well, you know what? Like, let me try just with what this dummy looks like. And then this came in and I was like, oh, this is exactly what I want. Like, I just want this like kind of brutalist brick.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm currently in the design of it, dealing with, I want this, like I want all white edges to it.
Uh-huh.
So nothing can bleed off the edge. So I'm in some ways modifying some of the monsters so that the ink tendrils actually cut off so that it doesn't bleed off the page.
Mm-hmm.
Just so that I can keep this really brutalist, pure aesthetic of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Over the years, I've condensed it to, I like people and I like puzzles. And so I create puzzles that connect me to people.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And so when you did you did 344, but then eventually that turned into 344 questions.
Yeah. So 344 has been the name of my studio all this time. And so everything was always branded as, oh, it has to be 344 something.
Mm-hmm.
And and so the questions book was also, how do I connect with people and how do I share some of the stuff that's going on in my life in a way that isn't just self-indulgent.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd been going to therapy at that point for a while. And I'd read yards and yards of self-help books.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost always had this moment of going through a self-help book, and I'd go like, yeah, oh, this is really good. This is a really good idea. Oh, yeah, this is cool. And then it would sort of go into a little bit of the background of the author, and they would tell a personal story. And it was like, well, when I was born, in the quad of Harvard Exeter, and my parents, who happened to own a movie studio, said, why don't you direct a film?
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be like, oh, fuck off. Right? Like one of the co-creators of The Simpsons, I was like, oh my God, like, how did you become the showrunner for Taxi at 23? It's like, well, my mother who ran MCA at the time, and then my father who was an agent, and then when we were literally growing up down the street from Elvis, like, oh, go, right? And still, like, you're still a genius and you still did amazing work, but come on, like, how is this actionable for me?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, can I do this in a way that gets around that moment of, oh, your advice, I can relate to your advice, but I cannot relate to your life story. And so I thought, how do therapists do it? They just ask you questions. Like, your therapist will go like, well, when I was growing up as a wee little psychotherapist, it's like, oh, how do you feel about that? Oh, what does that bring up for you? And so I thought, okay, what if I just do a book that's kind of a flow chart format of questions? It's not really truly flow charts because it's not a decision tree, but it's kind of, maybe it's like a junior jumble from fast food placemats or something, but it's just aesthetically, it's this kind of flowing system of questions to take you through a thought process to help you evaluate where you are, where you would like to go, what's keeping you from going there, or what's helping you. So it's kind of a self-assessment that's packaged in a fun aesthetic. Looks like this.
Yes.
And then I'll call it 344 questions because 344 is the studio, and that was sort of what I was known for.
Yes.
And then at this point, there are how many bonus questions? It's about 3,000 questions.
Wow.
So originally it was 1,484 bonus questions, but now in the expanded edition, there are another 874.
Wow.
Because I like to provide a good value.
Yes. And I'm just going to quote this here. 344 questions, the creative person's do-it-yourself guide to insight, survival, and artistic fulfillment, which is beautiful. You also read these on TikTok, which I found, was it during the pandemic, maybe slightly after, which I love. You have the most amazing voice. And when you read these, it's like a bedtime story. How did you get on TikTok?
I was on it. I think I got on it during the pandemic, and it was like, well, I just want to check out what this is. The first day was utterly baffling because I'm like, I don't even understand the category of what I'm looking at. And within a day or two, the algorithm clearly figured me out and was like, oh, we know what you like. Endless guitar videos, kittens, and design stuff. And then when I started doing the expanded edition of this, I thought, well, how do I let people know about it? And I thought, well, maybe I'll just read them out, and it's also a way to get me out of the house because a lot of them I would do out on my walk. And everything I do is kind of my way of saying, let's play together, let's connect, let's do something. And because it's otherwise hard to spend months and months and months of concerted effort on something and then just put it out, and it's kind of like throwing a penny down a well and not even hearing the water splash.
Mm-hmm.
So I need some sign of that the message is being received somewhere. And
Yeah.
so TikTok was that for me, and it's been great. I love TikTok, and in the same way that I loved early YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be the next platform after that, and I'll jump
Mm-hmm.
on that too. And there's always going to be some flavor that works better on that.
Mm-hmm.
I have thoughts in the back of my head of, oh man, like this is going to really connect and it's going to be a big thing, and then it's going to open all these doors.
Mm-hmm.
And I've kind of let that go. I had that for many years where I made my mental well-being dependent on how many likes do I get, how many comments do I get, what is the nature of the comments.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very, very careful about outsourcing my self-worth that way now, because it's just too dangerous for me. And whenever I start with something like that, I feel the tendrils of it. Like I feel the pull of, oh, like how many people reacted to this today? Oh, what can I do to get maybe 2 more people tomorrow?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I just have to do my thing and hope for the best. But you mentioned the Kickstarter and how quickly it was funded.
Yeah.
Part of that is that I've been very, very insecure about how people are going to respond to the work I do.
Oh, really?
So when I put out the Kickstarter, I've done 2, and both times I put it out with a funding goal that was well below what it would cost to actually make the thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I honestly didn't want to have a failed Kickstarter on my resume.
Mm-hmm.
And I also didn't want to have a failed Kickstarter on my psyche, because there's a part of me, I do internal family systems therapy. So it's always, there's a part of me that feels this way. So there's a part of me that's very much the uncool kid that nobody wanted to talk to in school.
Mm-hmm.
And that kid doesn't need another piece of evidence of, yeah, see, people don't really like you. And so it's like, all right, well, it's going to cost at least $5,000 to make this book, but let's ask for 3,000, because I can probably get there. And if I have to sort of get my mom to pledge to get it over the top, I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was just super, super happy that it got funded in under 24 hours.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy shit, that's amazing, right?
Yeah.
And so that was just, yeah. And then I'm like, man, I am so much happier about that than, and I also I don't like, hustling my friends for money and going like, hey, I'm doing this thing, we're really, really close. It'd be really great if you could kick in. I don't want to be that guy.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but it's been a really lovely experience, and I'm retouching these monsters like an absolute fiend, because again, I also want to make a good product for people.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the monsters are quite beloved, and I completely understand the feeling of not wanting to add injury to the young part of you. That was not the cool kid.
Yeah.
I relate. So you've got your 344 book and questions. You've got the monsters. Where do you go for inspiration now? So you've done all of this work. You've created these, and I think they're incredible masterpieces. You should check them out if you haven't already, or follow Stefan on TikTok. It's delightful. So now, where do you go for inspiration? How do you continue to protect that part of yourself that doesn't want to be motivated by likes?
It's always been music for me.
Right.
And I think even design and illustration ultimately I was told as a kid, oh, music isn't for you. In the same way, in the same way that I think a lot of kids get told, oh, art isn't for you.
Huh.
And I was sort of immediately good at art. And I had maybe an easier way into it.
Mm-hmm.
But the inspiration was always music.
Mm.
I mean, even when I was 4 or 5 years old, I mean, I'm of an age where the first songs I consciously remember are Dancing Queen by ABBA and Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
Also kind of maybe the emotional arc of my life. And so over 35 years or something of doing illustration and design, it's
Mm-hmm.
always been, how can I get this feeling that I get from this song and put it on paper?
Mm-hmm.
Which is in some ways a fool's errand because you just can't get there. It's just a different mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
I occasionally hear about people that say, oh my God, I went to the museum, I saw this painting and it made me cry.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so jealous of that because I don't have that capacity.
Oh.
Because when I go into the museum, I go in and I'm like this. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm 2 inches away from the painting. And I'm like, oh, I see what you did there. Yeah. You're using that paint. You're using like like a paint knife, and and you're doing the underpainting. Yeah. Like I always go into it that way. And with music also, I mean, I'll go like, oh, like what instrument did you use? And especially now that there's these apps that pull songs apart into the stems.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see what happens there. But it's all with delight. It's all just like, oh my God, like that feels so good. That feels so sad. And so my inspiration is always, can I do something that's like that? And now I do more where I actually am learning instruments and I'm learning how to actually do that primary thing.
Mm-hmm.
It took me decades to have enough courage to go, well, maybe I can touch the actual source of inspiration relative to looking through the store window.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it always sort of cross pollinates. And a lot of times the inspiration is somebody asks for my help. Somebody comes in and says, well, we need this, we need something for this movie, for this book, for this event. And then it's a puzzle. And then I go, okay, well, what do I think is the best way, first of all, to understand what you actually are looking for relative to what you think the solution is? Because people come in and like, well, we need a book. And I'm like, well, what are you trying to do? Let me just quickly check that I agree with that. But then it's like, how can I use what I know and to do and what I would like to do and what you need and kind of mold that into, like manifest that into some sort of object.
Yeah.
So the inspiration usually, I mean, I forget who it was. It was an author that would make me sound good if I remembered, who said, I can only write when inspiration strikes. Luckily, it strikes every morning at 8 a.m. when I sit down at my desk.
Wow.
And I think it is that. It's the inspiration is, hey, we need you to do a thing. And then I sit down and then I work at it until something shows up that I can then label as having been inspired.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. I get that completely. So your inspiration process is so different. It's so interesting. So you go to something that forces you out of your comfort zone and gets you out of your head. I love that.
Yeah, ish.
Ish.
I mean, I am 100% pro comfort zone. I think there is, no, because I think there's this real myth of if you want to be a great artist or if you want to be a great designer, you have to get out of your comfort zone. And I think that's wrong. I don't think that's true at all. I mean, I think you have to evolve your comfort zone, sure. But lean into the thing that you're good at and get great at it. Comfort zone, it's in the name, it's comfortable. And are you going to do better work where you're happy and you feel confident about what you're doing? Or are you going to do better work where somebody's like, hey, do more. You're not good enough. Do more. Jesus Christ. Fuck. I don't, okay. Whereas if I'm coming from a base of, yeah, you know what? You asked me to do that thing. I know how to do that thing. As a matter of fact, though, like maybe we can push it a little bit. Maybe we can do a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Like I come at it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of like, I'm just going to make myself as uncomfortable as possible and then somehow find my way back. I'm a comfy person. I'm a man of leisure and snack foods. And that's how I've built my entire career. And I have ambition and I have integrity, I hope, and a desire to do well by people and to do something that's delightful.
Mm-hmm.
And to be delightful, I think there has to be some surprise to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the surprise can be that what I do is naturally different from what a lot of other people do.
Mm-hmm.
It can also be that for the people who already know what I'm doing a little extra to do more new stuff that's new even to the people that have gotten used to what I already do.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, no, the opposite. Like I try not to leave my comfort zone. I just try to expand my comfort zone.
Interesting. Uh-huh. I love that. It's true. It does run counter to a lot of the design advice that's out there, or just artistic advice in general.
Well, because there's a self-promotion aspect to it. Because what I'm saying doesn't sound particularly cool or heroic. It's like I want easy mode plates.
Mm-hmm.
We're not easy, but ease.
Right.
I would like things to be gentle and harmonious and loving.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't thrive on confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
And that is confrontation with clients, confrontation with the work, challenge, sure, evolution,
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't strive on, well, I'm going to show you,
Mm-hmm.
like you didn't believe in me and I'm going to show you.
Mm-hmm.
No, somebody tells me, oh, I don't believe in you. And I'm like, oh God, yeah, no, you're right. You're right not to. Because there's part of me that's like, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I do suck. So for me, I need to stand very securely in where I do what I do.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not cool. It's so
Mm-hmm.
much cooler to go like, yeah, and I showed it to 100. I showed that book to 100 people. Nobody wanted it. Then finally, I showed them all.
Mm-hmm.
No, if I show my book to 3 people and they go, oh, that sucks, and I'm like, yeah, no, you're right. Let me just never mention it again.
So
that's not good promotion.
Yeah. So we live in this world of self-promotion, alpha people who are really dominant, confrontational, the salesperson type. And if you're more empathetic or sensitive, or you thrive on harmony and ease, you're kind of running counter to the way the world is set up right now if you want to be successful.
Yeah.
So how do you perceive success if that's sort of the setup of how things operate versus how you're choosing to operate?
A lot of these things I say now, and I've felt for a really long time. I'll surf a wave if it comes my way.
Mm.
And I've had the good fortune of having had some nice waves over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been really good about saving my money.
Mm.
And when I talk to design students now and they want to talk to me about type and all that kind of stuff, I talk to them about, do you have a savings account set up
Mm-hmm.
that pays you a decent rate of return? Do you have can you start a mutual fund or something like that? My definition of success is I don't have to do anything I don't want to do professionally.
Mm-hmm.
I live very humbly. What a bullshit, conceited thing to say. Very humbly, you see. Let me stroke my scarf. No, I live on a small footprint.
Right.
And I'm very lucky that I don't have house lust or car lust.
Mm-hmm.
I like a good pastry and I like a nice scarf, and that's kind of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't have to make a lot of money to live comfortably.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to spend a lot of money to live comfortably.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody looks at me in a way that I don't like, I don't have to work with them. And that's success to me.
Mm-hmm.
And especially now, it used to be that my work was it was my bid to be loved. And it still is, but I have to do it less. And I have a little bit more, not detachment from it, but I hold it in a better perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But for 30 years or so, I took every job that came along because I was like, oh man, if I really nail this one, and if I pick the right color and I pick the right font and I produce it just so where the press run is perfect, the gates of heaven will part and a divine light will shine upon me and I will be showered with the love and affection that I crave.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, about 8 years ago, some things happened where I was like, oh, I'm on the wrong train going in the wrong direction. This isn't going to work this way. And I've actually zoomed right past what I want because I thought that this was the tool to do it, my professional output. And then I was like, oh, no, wait a second. That's not how that works at all. And so now success is just, can I be softer? Can I be gentler? Can I actually allow myself to feel what I'm feeling and still function?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't succeed every day. There's a lot of days where I'm just like, why am I here? Why am I doing anything? And it's just, can I make it to snack time? But then there's other days where it's like, all right, well, like there's an idea in my head that feels like I want to pursue it and I have the spoons to pursue it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's success that I have earned the luxury now to not have to pretend I care about stuff I don't care about.
Mm-hmm. That is beautiful. I applaud you and your integrity and your courage to pursue the truth that you find in yourself. That's not an easy path.
And it's, and it takes away some community and adds community elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it evolves. And there is a point in between where you're sort of between the worlds a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's uncomfortable. You're just you're kicked off from your spaceship and you're trying to let the inertia take you to the space station on the airlock and you hope you don't run out of air before you get there.
Uh-huh.
I read a lot of sci-fi, what can I tell you?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think right now in that space again,
mm-hmm.
and the oxygen indicator is beeping at me pretty hard.
Mm-hmm.
But what can you do? I mean, at some point you kick off from one thing and you try to float to the next, and we'll see how it goes.
I think that's a perfect place for us to stop and move into the Q&A. Stefan, that was so beautiful. Thank you. If you would like to turn on your camera, if you have any questions, you feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can ask Stefan live. So give people just a second. I'm going to check the chat here. Let's see. Okay. So Devron says, I want to know more about where is balance, because I don't want to be that guy either. But also friends are supposed to support you. It's such a difficult feeling space to navigate.
There's so much depth to that question, and I don't think I understand it fully. Can you say more, please?
He says, I would love to ask what one personal belief or guiding principle has been the most powerful along your journey, or perhaps one piece of advice that's always helped you to create peace inside yourself.
Oh.
Sure.
Hey.
Oh. Hey, Devron, or you can ask yourself.
Hey, yeah, of course. So the first question, I know that you said in your conversation that you don't want to be that guy that's approaching your friends, asking them for support. But at the same time, it's kind of like that is a like fundamental step for the people that are closest to you. So how do you balance that? And if it is too complex, like it's something that I struggle with. Like I would love to reach out to more friends and family for support, but I hate selling. So
this isn't a failing in my friends. It's not a failing, but it's just an unhelpful insecurity in me. And I also think I've done well for myself over the years, right? And I feel bad asking for money when let's just be brass tacks. If I said, I want this book to exist, I need to write a $5,000 check to make that happen, I can do that, right? And so I feel like, oh, I don't need this. But I was listening to an Alan Watts lecture the other day, and he said in India, if you go to a sage, you have to wait months and months for them to see you because they want you to be committed to it, so that you don't just get the teachings for free because then they won't mean anything to you. And he said in the West, they won't wait, but you do the same thing. You achieve the same thing with money. And so there's a little bit of a commitment that comes with contributing that way, which I think the Kickstarter thing to some degree touches on. And even as I'm saying it, I feel kind of uncomfortable with it because I'm like, you need to commit to me, like this is the membership to the cult of Stefan or something. All of it makes me uncomfortable. And I think what this recent Kickstarter has shown me again, as the first one did, is there are people who are genuinely excited to be a part of it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what it says about me that surprises me, that maybe I'm cheap or parsimonious spiritually or financially. We're like, oh God, do I have to give you money? But every once in a while there's something like, oh my God, what a cool thing. Like I want to support that. Mm-hmm. And it comes as such a shock to me every time that people feel that way about stuff that I do, and that they're willing to genuinely be part of something in the process versus just buying a product.
Yeah.
And that's still something I'm learning to do, kind of a trust fall into somebody else's wallet. Mm. And it's so uncomfortable, but again, like I'm learning, and I also, part of how I do it is I set that a goal, a funding goal that was below the threshold of what it needed to actually be covered. Once it's covered, and once that goal is reached, then at least I can let friends know, and I can say, hey, I'm doing this thing. I want you to know about it, but you also are under no obligation. Like if you don't contribute to it, I'm fine. And so it is this odd dance of, no, I would love for you to be a part of it. And I would love, like for me, the big thing, like for me, like the biggest joy is even just putting their name in the little contributor row in the book and go like, hey, like, look, Ma, I've got friends now. So there's still that part, but it is so hard. And you're absolutely right. Like we're supposed to have friends and we're supposed to help each other out. And over the years, it's not been a consistent experience for me that I could rely on that. And there's a lot of pain around that for me that I struggle with in different aspects of my life all the time. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right to go out for it. And what's guided me over the years is I want to be there for people. And that can take different forms. And I often worry that I'm not doing enough for people. But sometimes it's also just like, hey, one of my best friends, we just send each other endless kitten videos. And all it is hey, thinking of you, like, hey, I'm alive, you're alive, we're alive together, cool. That's all it takes. Like sometimes it's like, oh, hey, I'm working on this graphic. Can you take a quick look at it and see if it's good, or can you help me? Like I had a friend reach out to me, and he's like, man, like somehow when I save this PNG, it's getting pixelated on the ends. I'm like, oh no, I know how to fix that. Like, let's just quickly get on the phone and we'll work it out. Like, I think that's just what I want to do, is just be there for people. And of course, there's going to be times when I need to be there for people in a big way.
Mm-hmm.
I am of the age where I need the occasional colonoscopy.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had a 5-month period where I would frequently make myself cry because it was clear to me that I had nobody who would drive me.
Oh.
And they don't let you take a cab because the sedation is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a liability thing. And I'm like, I've come to this point in my life and I don't have somebody who will drive me. And I asked a friend after much worry that they would say no. And they were like, oh yeah, of course I'll take a half day. I'll drive you, no problem. And I started crying to him on the phone immediately. I just immediately burst into tears. And so I think if I can do a little part to make the world not that for somebody else, that's what I'd like to do. I don't know if that answers your question about Kickstarters.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. No, that was beautiful. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Matt, did you want to turn your camera back on, or are you just hanging out? You can let me know in the chat. That was so beautiful. Yeah, I have a lot of the similar feelings you do. I think that's just beautiful. Oh, hi, Matt.
Thanks, Heather. Hey,
Matt,
Stephen, how are you?
all right, thank you.
I'm listening to the conversation here, and I'm familiar with your work. I had the chance to work with you at Zucalo, doing some illustrations for you.
Yes.
I appreciated having you reach out and ask me to do that. I guess the one thing I'm so curious about, when someone has created their own device that they're going to be putting out into the world, what is that process that makes you think that everyone is going to want to get into this, the process that supersedes stopping yourself? What happens, or what does it take to put something out that's so personal to you, something that you want to put into the world? How do you jump over that stopping block?
The very condensed answer is competence, skill. And this is why I'm constantly obsessed with getting my skills to the highest possible level. Because if my skill is to a point where I'm happy with it, where I go, this is competent work, then that's all I need to put it out there. Because beyond that, it's just opinion. Then you can go like, yeah, I think that's bullshit. Like, I don't agree with that at all. But it's well produced. That's fine. Like, that's all I need. If somebody comes to me and is like, well, I agree with that, but boy, that's a janky looking piece. Then I'm like, okay, that was under my control. I could have done that better. But this is why I am obsessed with production. I mean, the level of retouching I'm doing on these monsters would, blow your hair back. And what I do on press, and also the way I learn when I'm learning music now. And the problem is, it's also, in some ways, it's holding me back because there's stuff that I'm not doing because I don't feel that I'm technically good enough yet. And that's also because I'm working in this little sort of self-imposed vacuum. But in terms of how to put out something that feels personal, it's skill, and it creates a little force field of protection to say, yeah, you can say whatever you want about my opinion or about my artistic intent or any of that stuff. but you cannot possibly attack my means of delivery.
And
and to add to it, there is some stuff that is so personal that I can't even put it down.
Right.
Like the idea of making something that truly expresses intentionally what I'm feeling is at this point still entirely impossible to me. I wouldn't even know how to start. It's not even like, oh, I don't dare. Like I wouldn't even know where to begin. But I'll make something that's funny, or I'll make something that's sincere in some other way. And then I'll occasionally show it to my shrink and he'll go like, and I'm like, yeah, I just did a funny thing. And he's like, did you? Doesn't seem that funny to me. Seems like you're talking about that thing. And I'm like, oh shit, it slipped out the cracks. And I think sometimes that's how it happens.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I interrupted you. You were going to say something.
Having put out something so personal into the world and feeling confident with it, once it's out in the world, specifically this thing that you've put out into the world with the monsters, what surprised you? You put it out into the world, it comes back. What did it surprise you with when it came back? How did it change your world?
Just that, first of all, the fact that people liked it at all surprised me a little bit. And that they saw it in a lot of ways the same that I did, that they really saw them as like little living characters. Because to me, they're very much alive, and I get very kind of invested in the emotion of every one of the characters, or like the eyebrow raise, or the tilt of the head, or the gesture is like, it really is very emotional to me. And so the fact that I picked up on that was a big surprise. And then just the fact that they invested their own time in it to say, oh, not only am I going to view it and enjoy it, I'm going to take some of my energy and build on that. Blew my mind. Because I had put myself in a space where I grew into the kind of shape of tree where I'm over here, you're over there, I'll wave at you or something, but that's your thing, this is my thing. The fact that they were like, oh, I'm going to take your thing and I'm going to play with it. And that was a really beautiful, joyful thing, was just blew my mind. It just I hadn't been introduced to that way of being. And it is very musical. It's like, oh, let's jam, right?
Mm-hmm.
And part of it was facilitated by the fact that it was and is, when it's going, a daily concern. So it's like, all right, well, this is what we're doing on Monday. If you like it, great. If you don't like it, there's going to be another one tomorrow and the day after that. And and that's part of what the new book is also about. Is I've done around 1,500, 2,000 of these over the years. Not everyone's a winner. They all have charm, and they all have like little bits where you go like, oh yeah, like I remember that I was really into this part of it. This one, like the line kind of went off the rails a little bit, or like, I got the perspective fucked up.
Yeah.
To some degree, it didn't matter for what it was. But then you also go like, okay, well, if I go through it, if I really just pick the ones where everything worked, then all of a sudden I'm looking pretty good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so
You should check out Matt's. From Zocalo. There's I curate a monthly feature on ZocaloPublicSquare.org. That's called Sketchbook, where we get a different illustrator every month, and Matt did beautiful work for that. So check that out.
We'll make sure that link is at the bottom of the YouTube. We are now just about, thank you, at 1 hour. So I'm going to close this unless anybody else has any other questions. Now is your chance. if you'd like to talk to Stefan directly, or you can also drop it in the chat. Okay. Stefan, it has been my absolute pleasure to speak with you. We've kind of been circling each other's orbit for a while via social, and I'm just so thrilled you said yes.
It's been my pleasure. This has been so wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And you can find out more about Stefan at 344questions.com. Is there anywhere else you'd like people to, if they wanted to know more about you, where they can find you?
If you really want to deep dive, 344lovesyou.com.
Oh, that's beautiful. Okay. Thank you, everybody. And Stefan, if you can just hang out for a second, we're going to close the room. Thank you again for showing up for another Developing Life podcast.